Happy Sabbath, church family. Thank you for joining us online again this weekend to worship and praise God all together. I want to thank really quickly our students and our staff from the San Diego Academy for helping also put this worship service together this weekend. This weekend service is a very special one for us today because today we get to celebrate our graduates. Graduates, today it's all about you. Today we celebrate all that hard work, all the countless hours that you spend to reach this very moment, graduation. You know, graduation is an achievement praiseworthy of anyone who's able to reach it. But I think you all in particular are deserving of a bit more credit this year because you were able to reach this point. You were able to reach graduation while facing a global pandemic. You know, COVID-19 has truly disrupted the way that the world has functioned. The norm has been set aside and everything that was so typical in life is not so typical anymore. You know, you as students had your schools closed. Your classes were moved online. You couldn't see your friends and your classmates that you're so used to seeing every single day. You couldn't participate in clubs and athletics. All those sorts of things. Life was truly turned on its head. Yet through all of these trials and through all of these tough times, you were still able to focus, to hone in, and to come out on top, and to reach this point. And words can't even begin to describe how proud I am, your churches are, your friends, your family. We are all so proud of you, graduates of 2020. Congratulations on reaching this milestone in your life. You know, graduation is a time that's filled with a lot of different mixed emotions. On the one hand, it's very exciting because graduation is a time where you really get to celebrate all that hard work and effort that you put in. You've reached this milestone. You've now set forth and taken the first steps into truly becoming an adult. And now you feel like you begin to really have a little bit more responsibility and control over your life. You get to really set and decide what you're going to be doing in the future, whether it's working or going to higher levels of education. You get to decide what classes, what job, what career path you're going to be going down. You get to focus more on specific subjects, things like that. All those countless hours of projects, of homework, tests and quizzes, studying, it all seems to have paid off. I remember how satisfying that feeling was when I graduated from high school myself back in 2012. I felt so excited for so many different reasons to be moving on from high school and going on into college, to be able to choose and focus specifically on working towards my goal, my dream job of becoming a pastor, of having that feeling of more responsibility and control, of being my own person, being an adult in this life. It was such an amazing, exciting feeling, such a wonderful bundle of emotions. Yet at the same time, graduation can be a time that can be very nerve-wracking, very intimidating for a lot of us. Because maybe there are a lot of us who are unsure of what the future holds. You're not sure of where you're going to be going. You're not sure of what you want to study, what you want to do in the future, what your job is going to be looking like, whether you want to study or work in the first place. And there's a lot of questions that pop up. You know, is this path that I'm choosing to follow, is it what God has truly called me to? Is it a path that I can see myself working and going down for almost the rest of my life? Or is it something that's maybe bound to fail? Will I be able to achieve it? Is this something that, just financially speaking, is it practical? Is it something that can sustain me for the rest of my life? Are my dreams, are my goals, are my aspirations truly worth something working for? There's so many questions, there's so many doubts, there's so many intimidating thoughts that could come up during this time when you're moving from one phase in your life and taking that step, that journey into the next. It can be so overwhelming. I know, again, personally from my own experiences. And so having gone through these a few times myself, Today I wanted to share with you all graduates a few words of encouragement and a few words of advice that I think will help you all a lot in your journey as you're taking these new steps into this new future, into this new point in your lives. And to help me do that today, I want to look at, in the Bible, the book of Daniel, specifically Daniel chapter 6. Now, Daniel chapter 6 is a story that I'm sure many, if not most of, or all of us know and have heard of before. Daniel chapter 6 is a story of Daniel and the lion's den. Now, we're not going to be going through this whole story together because it's a very long story, it's a very long chapter. But there are a few verses in Daniel chapter 6 that I wanted to highlight for all of us today because I believe that these verses that we're going to be looking at today highlight 3 important lessons that we as graduates, that you all as graduates can take away and learn from today. And so with that in mind, I want to begin by looking at Daniel chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. You can follow along at home in your Bibles, or you can look at the screen, as we'll have the verses on the screen as well. So Daniel chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 say this. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Again, there's so much that we can gain in these few verses from this wonderful story. And I wanted to start again by looking at verse 9, where it says, Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. In other words, what it's saying is that King Darius signed a law that came with it a specific punishment should this law be broken. Now, for those of us who may have forgotten or be unfamiliar with the background of the story, we see that earlier in this chapter, Daniel has just been appointed to become the new ruler of all of the kingdom over all the other local rulers, the governors, and the officials at that time. Daniel has achieved so much. He's done so many great things for King Darius that he's gained King Darius' favor. And all these other officials, all these other rulers were jealous and really didn't like Daniel at all. In fact, they didn't like him so much that they wanted to try and get him in trouble and get rid of him. But unfortunately for them, Daniel was just too perfect in the way that he acted. He was too perfect in the way that he did things. And so they couldn't ever find a way to get Daniel in trouble. And so they kept plotting and scheming and trying to find a way to perhaps get rid of Daniel. And finally they noticed something. They noticed that Daniel 3 times a day would go into his home, up to the roof to a window, where he would pray outside of this window to God. And so noticing this pattern, they decided to go to King Darius and introduce to him a new law, stating that for 30 days, no one in the kingdom would worship any other god, or praise, or bow down to any other man or ruler, except for King Darius himself. And so, King Darius, not really knowing the plan behind this, signed this into law with the punishment that should anyone break this law, they will be thrown into a lion's den to be condemned to death. So verse 9, he signs this law, and we see that Daniel and the rest of the kingdom must follow or die. Now, the signing of a law is very significant, not just in the context of this story, but in the context of today as well, because when we look at laws being signed, both in the past and in our modern day today, laws being signed signify change. Change in the way that often people must act, change in the way that people think or the philosophy behind actions, change in maybe leadership itself. We see that change itself is something inevitable that we as people face every day as well. Changes in behavior, changes in expectation, changes in the way that we see other people, other countries, other individuals. There's so many different ways that life changes around us. Life also throws unexpected events, occurrences that change the way that we live every single day. We just have to look at our year that we're in right now, 2020. This year has had so much change that no one expected. I remember when the school year started this past 2019 in the fall, I asked a lot of the kids in our youth group the same question that I like to ask them every year. That is, what are some of your goals, your aspirations, your plans for this next upcoming school year? And I got a lot of the same responses that I get every year. No procrastinating, working harder, doing better, getting better grades, doing better in athletics, all those sorts of things. No one in our youth group, no one in our church, no one in our city or in our world could have ever thought, planned, or imagined that in 2020 we would be staying away from each other, quarantined in fear of getting sick and dying. No one imagined that schools would be closed and classes would be online and everything would be done at home. No one imagined that graduation would be online. Yet here we are. The world has changed. This is the new norm. This is the way that life is right now in this moment. And unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Jesus warns us in the Bible, and multiple scientists and experts have all said that this is just the beginning. There are so many more things to come in the future, so many more things that we won't expect, that we won't plan for. Change is inevitable. And we have to get used to the fact, and we have to realize the fact that change will be constantly coming in our lives. And so, dear graduates, my first word of advice to you today is be prepared for change. Change can come and will come at any moment. Change, just like in this year, can happen in such drastic ways, such life-altering ways, ways that we never plan or expect. Be prepared for change in your life. Moving on then to verse 10. We see that it says in verse 10 again, "Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open towards Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously." So we see that even though King Darius has passed this law prohibiting people in the kingdom for 30 days from worshiping, praying, praising any other gods or men or rulers, Daniel continues to do the same thing. He follows the same pattern. Every day, 3 times a day, he goes into his home, he goes up to the roof, to that window, kneels down, and he prays to God. Now, we notice a very specific detail here mentioned in verse 10, talking about the direction that the window was pointing, that Daniel was praying from. We see that this window that Daniel was praying from pointed specifically to the city of Jerusalem. Now, this is significant to this story because we know that Daniel was not a native Medo-Persian. Rather, originally, Daniel was from Jerusalem. Jerusalem, many years before, had been conquered and captured and destroyed by the Babylonians. And Daniel had been taken as a prisoner, as an exile, into the kingdom of Babylon. And from there, the Medo-Persians conquered the Babylonians and took him to Medo-Persia. And so Daniel, for all of his life, ever since he was a young man, was taken and raised and taught in the customs and the teachings and the ways of other countries. He was surrounded by pagan idolatry and worship of other gods. And he was taught to believe and act and do the same things that all of these other countries were doing. And we see that through this action of praying towards Jerusalem every day, Daniel never forgot his roots, his home. Because not only was Jerusalem his home, we also see and we also know that Jerusalem housed a very, very important building. That was the temple. The temple was the dwelling place of God on earth. It was a place where people could go to be in God's presence, to be with him truly, to experience him in a way that they couldn't anywhere else. Daniel recognized this. He recognized his true God. So every day Daniel turned toward Jerusalem, to his home, to the temple, to God's presence, to look to him, so that he would never forget, that he would always remember God, his home, his roots, his teachings. Graduates, as you move on into a new phase of life, as you continue to mature more and more and become adults and begin to live your own lives, you'll notice that as you go out into the world today, there are so many pagan idols, so many distractions, so many idols in the world that Satan has put out there to distract you, to tempt you, to take you and your attention away from God, from your home, from your roots. And Daniel here shows us the powerful, important lesson and an example that no matter what the circumstances are, no matter where we go in life, it is so important for us to remember our roots, to remember our home, to remember our God. Daniel did this despite the pressures of the kingdoms, of the nations around him that he was in. And because of this, he experienced so much success. He was always in charge. He was always successful wherever he went. God was with him in everything that he did. And in the same way, if you remember God, if you turn to him every single day, no matter where you are, no matter where you go, God will help you and will be with you in the good and in the tough times as well. So dear graduates, my second word of advice to you today is to remember your roots, to remember your home, remember your God, no matter where you go, every single day. Finally, I want to read for us Daniel chapter 6, verses 21 and 22. It says, Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him, and also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime. So inevitably, having broken the law, we see that Daniel has been thrown into the lion's den. The other officials, the other rulers are celebrating, I can imagine. King Darius himself was very distraught. He was very sad. In fact, that entire night that Daniel is in the lion's den, he is unable to sleep. He can't eat. He's just worried, pacing back and forth, filled with anxiety. And the next morning, first thing that he does is he goes down to the lion's den, tells his soldiers to remove the covering, and yells down, probably filled with dread and with the worst expectations, asking Daniel, Daniel, are you there? Are you alive? Are you doing okay? And to his surprise and to his joy, Daniel responds saying, Yes, King Darius, I'm okay. I'm alive. I'm well. My God sent his angel to shut the mouths of the lions to protect me. I'm perfectly fine. And then in verse 22, he says something that's so powerful. He says to King Darius that he, Daniel, was found innocent before him. Now, him isn't King Darius that he's talking about. Him is God. Now, this is so powerful because, in a sense, what Daniel is saying when he's proclaiming to King Darius is that he's saying that God's justice, God's law, God's rules are more powerful, more fair than the laws of men, written and signed by even King Darius himself. He's saying that no matter what rules, no matter what laws that the other rulers may come up with, it doesn't matter what these rules are. It doesn't matter that King Darius, the most powerful man in the kingdom, signed that very rule. It doesn't matter that he proclaimed that everyone else had to follow it. In the eyes and the justice of God, Daniel is innocent, and therefore, Daniel survived. God's justice is more powerful than any law, any justice that man can ever come up with, can ever imagine. And this is such a powerful statement given the circumstance that Daniel is in. Imagine saying that to the most powerful man in the kingdom, to King Darius himself. Being in a lion's den, surrounded by a bunch of ravenous, hungry lions, talking to a man that literally could kill you at a whim, could kill you in whatever method or way that he wanted. Daniel proclaimed God's justice, even to King Darius himself, saying that King Darius himself was below the justice of God. This is such a powerful example that Daniel sets for us. And I think it's something that we can all learn from, because we are in a world today that is filled, that is rampant with evil. And our country here today, the United States of America, we have a great justice system compared to a lot of other countries around the world. But even our justice system so often seems to fall short. Evil so often seems to prevail. We only have to look at the recent examples of George Floyd, of Ahmaud Arbery, of so many countless others over the years that have had evil done to them, that have been killed, that have been oppressed. And it just seems like nothing is being done. Nothing is changing. I can resonate, and I know, and I myself am so frustrated with all these things that have been happening, as I'm sure everyone else is as well. And what I can say to you is two things. We can first of all trust in God's justice, knowing that it may not be immediate, but in the end, when Jesus comes again, God's justice will reign supreme. But more importantly, and secondly above all, I believe when we read this story that we are called in this verse, just as Daniel did to King Darius, we too as Christians today are called to proclaim, to practice, and show God's justice to the world around us. You know, Jesus himself and his ministry on this earth was all about justice. When he started his ministry in Luke chapter 4, verses 18 and 19, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord." When the world around us today is filled with so much evil, with so much injustice, it is that much more important for us and for you all graduates to become people who proclaim the justice of God, justice that was practiced in the ministry of Jesus, justice that Daniel himself proclaimed to King Darius right there in that moment. We can trust in God's justice, in God's fairness, to cover the injustices, the evils, the oppression that exists and that our limited justice system that we as men have created here on this earth cannot cover today. Dear graduates, my final word of advice to you as we begin to wrap up this message is this: trust in God's justice and be people that proclaim God's justice to others. I just want to say as we close that, again, I, the churches, all of our families, parents, siblings, friends, we're so proud of every single one of you graduates for reaching this milestone, for getting to this point, despite the struggles of this year, despite the struggles of life in general. We're so proud that you've reached this moment, of everything that you've achieved up to this point, for the countless hours of sacrifice, of studying that you've had to go through. We're so, so proud of you, and we congratulate you again. We pray and we hope that you remember these 3 little words of advice that Daniel shared with us in the story of the lion's den today. And I also want to just encourage you to remember that you are not alone in this walk of life. Even if you're going off to a new area, to a new location, we here as pastors, your parents, your friends, your family, all these people who care for you, we're here for you all. When you're going through the highs, we're here to celebrate with you. When you're going through the lows, we're here to support you, to help you get through. Congratulations again, graduates, class of 2020. We love you. We're so proud of you. God bless.